Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session. Today, we're going to be hearing from the experts about what they look for from CS in the boardroom and in VC meetings. I am Jennifer Griffin. I am the VP of Customer Success at TrustRadius, based in Austin, Texas. And I am super thrilled to get to have a panel with all these great experts. And I'm going to let them go around and give a quick introduction. And we'll start with you, Joanna.
Oh, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Joanna Arras. I'm with Baird Capital. We are a Chicago-based investment firm. I'm on the venture fund there. We're investing out of a dual sector fund, tech and healthcare. I sit on the tech side. And I've gotten to know Churn Zero in the customer success markets over the last couple of years here as we led the Series A investment last year. Great to be with everyone.
Awesome. Julia, you want to go?
Sure. Julia Taxin, broadcasting live from here in Washington, D.C. We led the seed round of Churn Zero and participated in the A. So we're early stage technology investors, been around for 35 plus years.
Awesome. And last but not least, we've got Van.
Hey everyone, Van Jones here. I'm from Drive Capital. We're Columbus, Ohio based venture capital firm, 7 years old, large scale, and excited to be here, guys.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for taking the time out of your busy days. And let's dive straight in, and we'll start with you, Julia. As CS leaders, we live and die by our retention numbers. For investors, when you evaluate a company for a potential investment, when do you start talking about retention?
Sure. So typically, one of the first diligence calls or meetings is really where we focus on retention and churn. To me, retention is one of the most important factors for the long-term success of the business. So sales are great, but if you're losing a significant portion of your customers, it's impossible to be capital efficient, and we invest in capital efficient businesses.
Awesome. Van, Joanna, you guys have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I can add. I mean, yeah, for me, I think that like customer centricity is like just huge. So when I look at from day one when having a conversation with the team, I'm always asking that question. Like I'm thinking through, even if from your first customer standpoint, do you have obviously a product that's meeting their needs, and are you thinking about you don't have to like yet have things like firmly in place. But are you thinking about ways to kind of, keep them in house? Because it's just way too expensive to lose your customers.
Yep. And are there red flag numbers that you would see that you would think, alert, this is something I need to dig into? I know there, metrics I'm sure depend company to company, but there are certain numbers that are just red flags to you.
Well, for me, I think about how like from day one, you're building in kind of that muscle. So like the metrics, depending upon like how you're structured, they could be a little different. But I'm looking at like anything that I can dig into from a product standpoint, from just kind of like saying, all right, are there challenges with any of the core aspects around your engagement levels, for example? If I'm looking into your numbers, if your engagement levels just keep on ticking down on a per customer basis, for example, by whatever you're measuring at, if you're looking at daily active, or you're looking at weekly actives, or whatever that might be, then I am starting to get, like concerned. So I'm like, for me, I want to be able to get as much signal as I possibly can that it's like top of mind for you as a team, and that you're like monitoring this as well. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Joanna, any thoughts on this topic for you?
Yeah, so I know you asked kind of on specific metrics. It's really dependent on the end market that you're going after, not just in regards to what sector you might be looking to sell into, but also what size of customer. If you're selling into the SMB markets, you want to try and keep your churn on a monthly basis lower than 5%. That churn figure would be astronomical if you're selling into the enterprise market. Churn is really it's a metric you can take at face value, but it reveals so much more about the value that you're delivering. So is the product or service that you're delivering, does it provide immediate value? Is it one time or one off in nature? The root problem that you're trying to solve, does it continue persisting after the product or platform has been adopted? Does it change user behavior? It starts begging all of these other questions. I think that's why we as investors start digging into churn early on, because it's a simple metric at face value, but reveals so much more about the business and the value that you're delivering.
Yep. Yeah, and I like that. I think everybody agrees that, it's one simple number, but there's a lot that goes into it behind that. Okay, cool. So we'll move to our next question, and we'll start with you, Van. So besides the renewal and those expansion rates, are there other kind of customer success metrics that are meaningful at the board level or at the VC level?
Again, I think that there's a lot of variation here from a metric standpoint when we're looking at that. So, I am all about the shifts. So I want to be able to understand, are we holding steady? Are we increasing with any of those metrics that we're looking at? When I'm looking at, we can have a conversation around net ARR retention and other we can have a conversation around that. But I am when I'm looking at having conversations with companies in our portfolio, I'm just trying to understand, how are they thinking about the full complement of the offerings? So, for example, one of the things that I might dig into is, the actual individual features that are being used as part of the product, and are we seeing more exploration of new features? Are we seeing users kind of going in, and are we seeing that? Are we monitoring that in any smart way? And how are we thinking about those kind of questions? Because you as for whatever SaaS company that might be in our portfolio or looking to come into our portfolio, I am looking at just really understanding how cohesively you understand your product and what's driving your customers to either love your product or be kind of around your product. And I don't like I just don't like that. It scares me.
Yeah, I don't either. So it sounds like, adoption seems like it's a big key to you. Are they adopting it and using it more and more? Julia, Joanna, any thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, I would echo what Van said. The numbers are what they are. You can report on those, obviously, and discuss ways to mitigate or maximize those numbers. But to me, the usage of the product is really the key, and being able to understand what your baseline is. And when we come in to make an investment, what is the typical usage? How are you tracking that usage? If you see a pullback in that usage, that's obviously your number one red flag there. And so you definitely want to be a must-have versus a nice to have, and being part of that workflow of everyday use as far as the product goes, I think is key.
Sure.
Yeah, and I, just to add on, I agree with everything that has been said. Of course, my co-panelists are very smart and know what they're talking about. I think, three other areas that I like to dig into when it comes to customer success would be adoption of new modules as they roll out, and that's kind of similar to this feature and usage. But if you're rolling out a new module, how quickly is it being adopted? Is it selling to new customers only? Are you able to sell it into kind of your older or legacy customer base? I look really closely at implementation times too, and I think of customer success as in a lot of organizations owning that or having some ownership over that. And then finally, cohort analyses, which can apply to any of the metrics that we've talked about, but really help uncover trends over time and how behavior might be changing among the customer base.
Awesome, that's great. That's great feedback. So Joanna, we'll move kind of to our next question. Shifting gears a little bit, what qualities do you see in the best CCOs or VPs of customer success that you work with?
Yeah, and it's interesting because this has really been an emerging profile or role in the executive suite. And I think that those that have proven really successful out of the gate are those that understand the complete sales cycle. And they do that because that means they know what types of customers are being recruited. They know what types of customers, are actually being signed up and then are ultimately being handed over to them in the CS organization. So knowing that complete sales cycle and how that works, and then having a great handle on data is really important. This cannot be an anecdotal function. Especially early on, as CS might be a newer department or function within the org chart. I would really encourage people to be more data focused than anecdotal as you prove the value that CS can bring. And then, as if I haven't already said that they need to be good in everything, being fluent in product and how product roadmaps work and how quickly you can roll out new features and exactly what asks, like what all comes with the ask that you have. From a CS department, if you take it to product and say, oh, our customers are asking for XYZ, what does that really mean? How long is it going to take to bring that to market? Is it realistic? So really you have to be on top of everything.
It's the impossible, right? That's what we try to do. That's really super helpful. Julia, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'd echo what Joanna said. It kind of same thesis as far as success for that role. I'll just, I guess, focus a little bit more on product there and the ability, one, to not only communicate effectively with the product team, but being able to ruthlessly prioritize those features. You're going to have, as you grow and scale, you have obviously more and more customers and more asks and wants. So being able to really prioritize what product feature specifically will scale and make the most customers happy. And obviously that'll drive retention as well.
Awesome. That's two strong pluses for a really tight collaboration with the product team, which I think is, yes, it's something that everybody kind of strives to kind of work those cross functional boundaries, which is always sometimes a challenge, but definitely a good one. Van, how about you?
Yeah, I think, I echo my two panelists, great points. But just to add, I think it's really important to understand how, in my opinion, your customers think about the implementation cycle within what they need to kind of get through. Because when there's somebody's telling you they need this feature and it's going to take them 6 months or a year to get budget for that, and you're prioritizing that right now, thinking about what that might look like, and what type of demands that might bring to your own team is super important. So really having an understanding of what the customer faces, because I've had lots of conversations with companies that don't realize that if we're talking about a multi-year implementation to be able to roll out throughout the entire organization potentially, what that could mean for putting your offering at risk if it's not hitting the key customers at the right time.
Yep, that's awesome. Awesome. So it's recommendation time. And so Julia, we'll start with you on this one. So there's certainly going to be those in our audience that feel they are not getting the resources required to deliver a really strong customer success program. As board members, what points would you give them to kind of convince a CEO to invest more?
So I'd say the past few years, there's been a key focus on customer success in the boardroom, at least the boardrooms that I've been in. When I first started in venture, board meetings would focus on revenue, pipeline, cost to acquire a customer. But more recently, most boards have come to the realization that retention is equally, if not more, important to a company's health. So what's the point in acquiring a customer if they're going to churn shortly after, and the expense of that, obviously. How can you grow existing customers who you've already sold to, expanding the relationship and naturally their size? Customer success can easily make the argument that cost to retain and grow a customer should be equally, if not more important than acquiring a customer. So, investing in customer success should be at the forefront of most CEO and board member priorities. I would say a few years ago, it would have been more of an uphill battle, but I feel like in more recently, the last 2 to 3 years, this function has become, more important to the overall business. And so I'd like to think it's not too much of a a sale there to the board to really focus resources on this. But and I assume that most CEOs would agree with that as well.
Okay, cool. So it sounds like you're saying, sales numbers are important, but so is equally that retention side, right? Because if you sell them really quickly, but then they go at year one, it's not a great model there. So kind of making sure that you've got a handle on your numbers to be able to kind of tell that story if your CEO is not noticing it on their own. Okay, cool. That's super helpful. Van, what about you? Thoughts on this?
Yeah, for sure. I think like what's really a challenge for me is when we're in that meeting and I think CS is super important for, especially when it comes to expansion, because we're going to invest oftentimes with at a time in which, the price for the customer may be a third of what we ultimately believe the customers, should be able to pay. And if we're not seeing the proper degree of expansion, we're seeing relatively low ACVs. That's when you really have to start thinking through, like, so why are your customers really not, why are they not expanding? Why are there challenges there? So for me, from a growth standpoint, from an expansion standpoint and a churn standpoint, but from an overall growth, it's just super key. Obviously, we know that it's just so expensive to get mind share if you're dealing with SMBs or you're dealing with like large enterprises. And so if you're not thinking that through and that's not like top of the agenda and you can't say, here are the reasons why our customers are either expanding or they're not expanding, and that's a problem. That's a problem going into those meetings.
Yep. So it sounds like for you, it's a red flag. If it would even be a red flag if the retention numbers were okay, but you're not seeing that expansion. It's just kind of flat from a customer standpoint. Is that a fair kind of assessment?
Yeah, I think that if for a lot of the customers that a lot of our customers that are in our portfolio companies pipeline, our portfolio companies, many of them sell to the enterprise. And so, expansion is key. If we're dealing with large banks and large institutions that can handle lots of seats, why are we staying in place?
Yep, absolutely. Joanna, how about you?
Yeah, so if I'm remembering your question, I think it's, if you're having a hard time getting the resources internally or getting your CEO or other leaders to buy in to invest more in CS, I really believe in business and in life, people do what they're incented to do. And each department can't have more than one top priority. And so what you're seeing, CS is really formed because this can't be a top priority of the sales function. It used to live under sales and it can't anymore. Sales is incented to sell new customers, to bring in new revenue. They are never going to replace that top priority with expansion revenue, like Van was talking about, or with upsell opportunity. Yet that is such a crucial piece of the puzzle in growing your business. So you now finally have a department carved out where this is going to be the top priority, and this is the key metric that they are measured against. You have to invest in it. You cannot convince another department that that is their priority.
Yep.
For sure, 100%.
I like that purity too, and I think you're right. As soon as you start having 3, 4, 5 goals, you don't hit any of them. And so it sounds like, and I know talking to other folks in CS that there's still, because it's such a new field, there's still a little bit of like squishiness on where some things sit, specifically like, do renewals sit with sales? Do expansions, upsells sit with sales? Where do you typically see it sit, and where do you like to see those types of things sit?
Okay, so we're investing, I don't think I mentioned this in the beginning, we're kind of investing at the mid-stage of venture. So I'm actually really curious to hear what the other panelists think about this, because I think it sits in different places in different phases of the organization's growth. I think early on, it sits in sales. But that's, a function of not having a fully built out management team or leadership bench. I think once you get to kind of that mid stage, once you get to 5-10 million of recurring revenue, that's when you start to see CS prioritized a bit more. And that's when it should start to sit there. But there is a struggle as you take it away from sales, I think, a little bit. And, in some super bizarro situations, I've seen it sit with a chief product officer. So there's no, there's no perfect template yet. And I think that's actually what all of us are charged with figuring out and being the thought leaders on. But yeah, I'm curious what you all see in some of the earlier stage markets, actually.
Yeah, I always say these companies have made it when they have a separate CS department. In early days, it's usually sitting under sales. Sometimes there's not even, there's maybe one person that's kind of focused on CS. As companies grow and scale, it becomes, for numerous reasons. One being, that sales isn't necessarily incentivized to keep their customers out because of their commission plans that they're on, and start become a little bit of a tension point within the sales team, as like nobody wants to be working on retention because what's the upside in that? And so finding the right comp plans for CS within sales, I think, is key if you're going to keep it under the sales organization. I have seen that under product as well. And I think a lot of that depends on who you're selling to, who your end customer is, how high tech is the sale that you're making. And so sometimes I feel like there does need to be quite a bit of crossover. If not, it's sitting under product, but that's more rare. To me, I think eventually it becomes its own entity, and it's incentivized, based on the metrics that we spoke about earlier. But yeah, typically it's under sales. I feel like until there's some type of tension where it needs to be brought out from under sales. And I've seen it sit under the CEO, and report up to the CEO as well. And not necessarily as a separate entity within the company, but maybe when like one or two people are on that team. So yeah, it depends on the size of the team. Obviously, it depends on who you're selling to. There's no right way to do it.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I can add more, but obviously, I mean, they've already covered like some great points. I think that like overall, when you're talking about stage, when you start having, it's a great problem to have. I love the CCS, departments formed, because that means you got something there that's starting to work, or that's been working, and you've got it to the point where your sales team essentially can't manage this, because typically I've seen it in sales from a sales function standpoint, and that's a great sign, because at that point, you want your sales team, you want them out there to find those new accounts. But you obviously have to worry about what's happening on the back end. So, I love early on, I've typically seen it from a sales team standpoint, and then later, fully formed.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so it does sound like it's just a phase, and it feels like there's no right answer necessarily. Awesome. Okay, cool. So Van, I got last question for you here. So many of the CS leaders watching want to help support their CEO in the boardroom, and they want to kind of be that resource. Any recommendations on what they can be doing to kind of help in this role?
Yeah, prioritize the KPIs and simplify it. I think that, like, at the end of the day, the entire team needs to keep the metrics that matter, like, super simple and super, like, just dialed in. And as a CS leader, you need to focus on, what are those one or two metrics that you can have the entire organization bought into, and know those extremely well, and know what's driving them behind the scenes, because that's what's going to matter when we're having like board meetings, having conversations. It doesn't have to meander. Very focused, very tight.
I like it. I like keeping things simple for sure, and getting down to a couple of metrics. First question: if a company has great sales but high churn, are you still interested in talking to them for an investment? Van, you want to take that one?
I mean, I'm always interested in talking to companies for an investment, but we think that retention really, really does matter. So having sales is great. But if you're coming in and then you're almost immediately going out, right? You're not able to attract them. That just creates a very costly customer. And so for me, I look at it as, I would be okay with I think it's a fixable situation when you have high retention of good quality customers, right? High, whatever you want to call it, however you're going to measure it, of good quality customers that are staying with you and that are hopefully expanding. And then we got to figure out ways to juice that pipeline in the right way to kind of get more in. But that you have a product that's sticky, that people really enjoy, that people are like, they're staying with and they want to do more. That's something that's like extremely important to me.
This one got quite a bit of votes. So how do VCs tend to view churn? Is this like a CS first issue, or is this an entire org issue? Where do you see that kind of fitting?
I look at it as an entire org issue with CS obviously taking the lead role there. But I always wonder why. And when I'm in having conversations with companies, I'll try to dig in and try to understand what's really going on behind the scenes. Is it an issue? So like, who's churning? What does the ASP look like for those customers? What was really going on there? I really want to break that down, because it could show a real organizational wide challenge from are you creating the product experience in the right way? Are there bugs that are coming out is it something buggy happening with with the system? Is it, is it just relationship management? Just kind of like, I want to be able to understand what's going on there. So it gives us a really good opportunity. And to be honest, this is one of the major things that comes up in board meetings. It's like, you sign a nice customer, that's a nice 6-figure customer, 7-figure customer. And now that customer's gone, what's happening here? Because a lot of the customers that are in a lot of the customers for our portfolio companies, they're able to write, they're in healthcare, or they're in some of these banks, for example, and they're spending $250,000 or $500,000 on the software. So what's going on? Because if you can't keep them, then are you going to be able to hit the metrics that we need you to hit financially? Is there just something really, really wrong? And that ultimately can ladder up to the CEO. That can be an issue for that could be a real challenge there. Hey, Julia.
Hey, man. Sorry about that.
Hey, she's here. Awesome, just in time. Cool. So Julia, maybe we'll throw a question your way. Kind of from your vantage point, what do you tend to see as more important? Is it the gross revenue retention or that net revenue retention?
I would say both are very important. I mean, it depends on the company, right? And we typically track companies on a net value. But again, it depends. It's very company specific. As long as you're tracking something consistently and seeing, it go up and down and tracking that, it doesn't really matter, right? It's all about the baseline. But we typically encourage net.
Yeah. Have you ever seen, do you have a rule of thumb on how much money, as a percentage, should be spent towards the CS org as you're kind of looking at now in future deals?
And again, it's very specific to each company, but CS is typically above the line, and so depending if you are obviously a software company, like I assume most of the companies on here are, under 5% is what we like to see.
Okay, super helpful. Always good to kind of get those kind of basic metrics for it. And it looks like we are right at time. We've got about a minute and a half left. Any closing words that you guys want to give? I think from my vantage point, it's super cool to see how much CS has kind of risen in the ranks of importance when it comes to those organizational health metrics. But any kind of parting thoughts you want to leave, Julia or Van or Joanna, if we can hear you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, conferences like this and bringing in thought leaders together, this is a really relevant topic, retention and churn, and it's going to continue to be a focus area for most companies and continue to grow. So I think, bringing leaders together, like today and putting, programming together is very important.
Okay, cool. Awesome. How about you, Van? You got any parting thoughts?
So we're having a board meeting, and next week we're spending about a third of that meeting talking about churn and retention. So it's definitely an issue, and I think it's super important. I think that companies that get it right they're in my good graces.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think, anyone who lives in CS, right, the churn is always kind of at the forefront of our minds. And then it's getting more and more important in those deals. And, hopefully everyone's getting tips and tricks all day today on how to do a better job and kind of getting those churn numbers down. So awesome. So thanks a lot. We got through several of the questions on here, not quite through all. We had tons and tons of questions. So I'm sure we will kind of get back with these if we didn't get to you today. And hopefully everyone has a great rest of their day.